In 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to Virtual Open Day at the Faculty of Theology and Religion. We're really glad you can join us. If you're watching live or if you're watching it later, this meeting is being recorded and it will stay on the site for a little while. I'm Dr. Mary Marshall. I'm Director of Undergraduate Studies at the Faculty of Theology and Religion. And I'm going to ask our current student, Darcy, to introduce herself, please.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. My name's Darcy. I study philosophy and theology and I go to St. Peter's College and I'm going into my 3rd year now.
Thanks, Darcy. Very soon, I hope that we'll be joined by my colleague, Dr. Dave Leal, who's a philosophy tutor. Because he's a philosophy tutor, he's bouncing around the Virtual Open Day, going to lots of different faculties, and he'll join us when he can. So we'll start off with some questions without him. I've been monitoring Slido this morning and collecting questions from there. On the Virtual Open Day webpage for Theology and Religion, you will see that Slido is still there. If you scroll down to the bottom next to this video, the live stream, there is a box where you can type questions in, and I'll be keeping an eye on that live as well. But it seems that there have been some good questions this morning about student experience. So Darcy, if you don't mind if I fire some at you, how about, the questions are over here, by the way, how about, so it's a good question. How did you find the transition from school to university? And I suppose this is something that's going to be particularly tricky for students this year and next year who may have had their schooling really disrupted. So how did you find making that jump, if it is a jump?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I just had a massive summer, so I sort of, you're a bit out of it for a while. It's your first summer before uni, and you just want to relax. Maybe you're going abroad, so you're just a bit out of it. So that definitely meant that there was just a massive time jump with the amount that I was working. Yes, I was doing reading over the summer, but not necessarily writing essays. So there was that. But I think the jump isn't as bad as people think it's going to be, which hopefully is a bit reassuring to hear. There are these myths that, you have to do, 7 essays a week, which is not true. And the only thing is that there is much more independence, and that can be worrying for some people, but try and see it as exciting. So, when you're off to university, you're not necessarily living at home. You'll be in the collegiate system, so you'll be assigned a college when you're in Oxford. There's much more independent reading, and you will get a reading list for theology, and you'll be expected to do the reading. And whereas in sixth form or college, they may, give you a particular article to read, or it's really specific. With your reading list in Oxford, it may be a bit broader than that. And at times, your tutors may even, encourage you to find your own reading or make up your own reading lists. So I think the one jump is just that, the massive amount of independence that you're given, which may seem daunting at first, but when you realize that everyone is in the same boat as you, it's actually quite exciting. And, there's your tutors to talk through things with, and there's a college parent system, which means you have a parent who usually does your subject, and you can actually talk to them about, how they navigated it. And you realize quickly that it's not that bad, and the jump really, really is fine.
Thanks, Darcy. It's always interesting for me to hear what sort of myths are going round, and certainly, we expect our students to work hard, but not that hard, not 7 essays a week. And it's all about, just like you said, gaining more independence. You're an adult and you are taking ownership of your study, and tutors are there to guide you. Having said that, that's what tutors are there for. Tutors want to support their students, and so students do sometimes find it difficult and sometimes struggle, and that's normal. That happens every year. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with that student. It just means that they need to flag that with their tutor, who is often, because they've seen it all before, able to identify where things are going off course and really give you some advice to get back on track. So it is a change from what you're probably used to, but it's also, as Darcy said, I hope a really exciting experience, and one that you will actually get accustomed to very quickly. The first week you do it, it feels immense. By the time you've been doing it a term, it sort of settles into a routine. I see that Dave has joined us. Dave, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
You can. So my name's Dave, and I teach philosophy in Oxford at one of the colleges, and I have just, for my sins, which in a theology session I suppose it's appropriate to own up to, have been spending my time among the PPEs, so the politicos, and I'm late because, as we all know, political types are very garrulous and they just keep talking. So it's taken me a little while to get to theology, but so that's who I am. And I'm involved in the philosophy and theology degree in particular, though I am also a member of the theology faculty, and in the past and even occasionally in the present teach the ethics side of theology, the moral theology side of things, and bits of doctrine and stuff. So I can talk a little bit about theology, but I have real experts here in the form of Darcy and Mary who can do that. But I suppose I'm on this call to talk a little bit more about philosophy, maybe the philosophy and theology test is involved in that, which I'm involved in setting. So that's why I'm here.
Thanks, Dave. So since I now have two philosopher theologians on the hook, I'm going to move on to that side of the conversation, because we've had several questions this morning about the philosophy and theology course and what really that's about, and how it differs from the theology and religion course. So maybe going to Dave first and then asking Darcy, the decisions that you made. Why, a question as it's been phrased, why would you choose philosophy and theology rather than theology and religion? What are the key differences between those courses?
Okay, I'm going to draw the lens back slightly, because I guess there may be people on the call for whom there's a theology of religion versus philosophy and theology question. That's the one that I suspect Darcy's probably the expert on that one, as she's made that decision more recently than I did. I moved from philosophy and maths to philosophy and theology, in fact. But I think I'd also say that philosophy at Oxford is always philosophy and. We don't have a just philosophy degree, a philosophy and nothing else degree at all. Cambridge do, Sheffield do, we don't. So there are places you can do just philosophy on its own, but Oxford isn't one of them. So if you're doing philosophy and theology, or philosophy and some other kind of combination in Oxford, you won't be unusual. In fact, you will be absolutely usual. Philosophy is never more than maybe 5/8 of an undergraduate degree here, and you'll mix as a philosophy and theology student with people doing so those politicos I was just talking about, the PPEs, philosophy, politics, and economics. There's rather a lot of them. Darcy may think there's too many of them. We can ask her that question in a little while. But there are a lot of them. There are people doing philosophy of linguistics and philosophy with modern languages. So there are humanities type philosophy degree people, and there are philosophy of maths, philosophy of physics, philosophy and computer science. So philosophy at Oxford is always a joint thing. So people sometimes ask, if I do philosophy and something else, will I be missing out on what other people, when they're doing the whole degree, are doing? And the answer to that is no, you won't be missing out on that, because nobody does, not in philosophy. But in theology, they kind of do. So what is theology and religion if you're just studying that? Well, theology and religion carries a few things that are compulsory, like the study of a language, that aren't compulsory in philosophy and theology. Now, those of you who are language averse might very well think, oh, that's a good thing. And I suspect we often end up talking a little bit about language and language learning in this session. For philosophy and theology, you do not have to do a language, a scriptural language, whether it's New Testament Greek or Arabic. You don't have to study a language. But you can. And I think, those of us who set the degree up in its current form were very insistent that we wanted it to be possible for people to do that. So you could. What you get instead, again, Darcy can tell us more about this in a bit, and counselling is available for her afterwards if she needs it, is logic. So we give you, instead of what we could call a natural language, an ordinary human language, we give you a language of mathematical precision to analyse arguments and think about the way in which persuasion works in terms of logical rigor and thought. And that's a compulsory part of the course that then can lead on further into thinking about logic and the nature of language more deeply in the degree later on, if that's what you want to do. Lots of things you can get up to in philosophy that you won't have access to if you do theology and religion. So one thing to think is, if I do theology and religion, what's what economists would call opportunity cost? What is it that I'll miss out on? Well, you won't miss out on the chance to do languages, because you'll be able to do those. Obviously, in theology and religion, you'll have to. And you won't miss out on the chance to do philosophy of religion. That's quite important. It's a compulsory paper on the philosophy and theology degree. It's an option paper, the same philosophy paper, that anyone can do if they do theology and religion. So if what's got you thinking about philosophy is the philosophical stuff you've done at A-level, and philosophy of religion's exciting for you, don't immediately think, well, I should do philosophy and theology then, because you can do that paper as part of your theology and religion degree, and you can do lots of things that cluster around it. So you can look at the nature of religion, you can look at 19th century doctrine. Lots of the modern philosophical trajectories that we get in so-called post-Kantian philosophy, 19th and 20th century philosophy, come from theological roots. Hegel is deeply affected by theological currents, as is Kant. So late 18th, early 19th century philosophy is deeply affected by theology. You can probably do more of that in the theology and religion degree than you can on the philosophy and theology degree. So look at the contents of the course and what the possibilities are. Theology and religion might be for you. You can also do ethicsy stuff as part of theology and religion. Obviously, you can as part of philosophy and theology. You can do that as part of theology and religion, but it will always come in the context of some religious tradition or in relationship to some religious tradition on the theology and religion side. On the philosophy side, there will be so-called meta-ethical questions, the nature of ethics, that might take you into the areas of theology. But most philosophy tutors will not be interested in those questions or well equipped to talk about them. Is morality ultimately rooted in God? Most philosophy tutors will, frankly, not be very well set up to even talk about that question. Some of them will be resistant to it. Some of them will be quite friendly towards it, but it won't be a central thing that they want to do. So look at what each version of the degree, philosophy and theology, theology and religion, offer you. But if your interests are philosophical, but they're philosophical arising out of religion, theology and religion is plenty philosophical enough if you want it to be. Darcy, over to you to put me right on anything.
No, I think Dave, you said everything there's to say there, really. I guess the thing for me is I knew I didn't particularly want to study a language, and that's what drew me more towards the philosophy and theology side. And also just the fact that I will be in two schools, so in two departments. I like the idea of doing a joint honours. Some people like the idea of doing a single honours. I liked, having, sorry, it's very loud where I live. I liked having these two, two different departments to bounce between. And also, as Dave said, just look at the syllabus and what sort of stuff is offered. I was really interested when writing my personal statement on different religions and their interaction, and that's why I wanted to study religion of religions. And I knew that's something you could do with philosophy and theology, and also the aesthetics paper. I'm quite a creative person. That's something I'm doing now, and you can take that if you're doing the joint honours school as well. So just have a look at things that tickle your interest and see whether you're able to do them with which.
Thanks. We've heard some good advice there, I think, and it's advice not just for applicants who are stuck in that theology and religion versus philosophy and theology dilemma, but actually what lies at the root of making decisions about what course you're applying to is actually understanding what the course is going to cover and then thinking about your own interests and aptitudes. We've already heard a little bit about how you shouldn't judge a book by its cover and you shouldn't judge a course by its title. And we've heard hints that actually some things that a lot of people consider to be philosophy might emerge more prominently on the theology and religion course. Some things that seem like not theology, like language, emerge on the theology and religion course. Some things that look very different from how a lot of people conceive philosophy. If you've not encountered formal logic, it might not have occurred to you that that is part of a philosophical discipline that emerges on the philosophy and religion course. So you have lots of time to do this. You're attending the virtual open day, which is a good start. On the faculty websites, both theology and religion and philosophy, we include real information about our course options. If you go to the FAQs for undergraduates on the theology and religion website, there are some direct links to where you'll find information about particular course options. Those are publicly available. Read them, have a look and see what actually is available for you to study and how the courses map on to what you think you want to do. Don't just pick a course on its title, not at Oxford, not at any university. Always find out how the institution understands that title, because it's going to differ, sometimes quite significantly across institutions. So make an informed decision. I think that's a really important lesson to learn for anybody who's considering UCAS application at the moment. And we've dealt quite a bit with philosophy and theology. I'll just append one extra question that draws out of what we've been saying, and it's a particular question which I will put in the first instance to Dave, and I'll read it to make sure I get it correct. And it's the kind of question I imagine that might not have occurred to all applicants, but is important to some. How focused is the philosophy and theology course on analytical philosophy? Is there space to explore other formulations of philosophy in contemporary times and history? You've already said a little bit about that, Dave, but it occurs to me that many of our visitors are not necessarily familiar with distinctions between analytical and other forms of philosophy. Can you say something about that?
Okay, so this notion of analytical philosophy, there's a sense in which any philosophy is engaged in analysis, in thinking through the precise contours and nature of different concepts. And so to that extent, all philosophy is analytical, all philosophy is linguistic. But there's a particular development that I suppose has its origins in the late 19th century in Germany. There's a particular development in philosophy that sees great hope in the development of the analysis of the logical structures of language. And that has its roots actually in philosophy connected with mathematics. And probably not since the late Middle Ages, and probably the late Middle Ages in Oxford, interestingly, has there been such a sustained period of investment in thinking about philosophy and the logical investigation and analysis of language and metaphysical questions and so on. Now, that, which is a tradition that's largely, although it starts in Germany, it also, partly because of the sort of movement of German philosophy towards the UK, and then the movement of philosophy from the UK into conversation with North America, is sometimes called Anglo-American philosophy as a sort of shorthand label. And whether that's actually fair to a lot of what goes on in departments of philosophy in British and American universities is a good question, but a lot of it is, I suppose, broadly in that sort of tradition. So a question about not that tradition could take us in a couple of directions. One is in the direction that a lot of philosophy has developed on continental Europe. So you will sometimes find labels like post-Kantian continental philosophy. And broadly speaking, that's two labels we could apply to that are existentialism, or the philosophy of existence, and phenomenology, or the philosophy of the inquiry into the nature, the analysis of experience. So it's still analytic, but it's not the analysis of language, it's the attempt to analyze experience. Do we have papers that deal with that in Oxford? Well, we have a paper in post-Kantian continental philosophy, so that would be one of the 8 papers that you could take as part of your finals. And because both on the theology and on the philosophy side of the degree, you have an option, you can only do one or the other, but you have the option of writing a thesis, an undergraduate dissertation of about 10 to 15,000 words on any subject of your choosing. You could then choose to spend it on that area of philosophy that interested you most, which might not be Anglo-American analytical philosophy. So there's opportunities, but it's not the whole of the degree. The other direction that these thoughts might take you in is, I wonder if I can study non-Western traditions of philosophy. Now, if you do, you might often find that they're actually not that different from Western traditions of philosophy, because they're asking the same questions with the same human thinking resources. But there are traditions of epistemology, or the theory of knowledge, in Indian thought, for example, that are not widely taught or accessible in British universities. We are very fortunate that we do have a number of people around Oxford who are capable of teaching Islamic philosophy or Indian philosophy, so-called Hindu philosophical traditions. So the question asked about contemporary, some of these things are approached via a lens of classic thought rather than up-to-the-minute contemporary thought. And a great many Indian universities are, frankly, as many Japanese ones and Chinese ones are, teaching Anglo-American philosophy of the sort that is true for most of our papers. But there is an opportunity to do some modern study of non-Western traditions. It's not much, but there is some, and it's developing, and we want to develop it more. And the phenomenological existential traditions, definitely there is opportunity to do that. We have a number of people in university teaching posts who are competent and do teach that paper, and a lot of graduate students do work in it as well.
Thank you, Dave. And indeed, the theology and religion side of the course, or indeed the theology and religion degree, is often a good context in which to explore Buddhist and Hindu and Islamic traditions of thought as well, and traditions of ethics. So there is quite a range available. Have a look at those course descriptions. Now we'll zoom back out a bit. I hope the prospective philosophers have had their fill for a moment, and look explicitly at some questions which will be on everyone's mind. And this particular set of questions has been expressed in a variety of ways, from do you have any tips for writing a personal statement, to how do you make a personal statement stand out? I have some opinions, but I wonder whether first, can I go to Darcy and ask you, your experience is closer to hand. How did you go about it? What do you wish you'd known then that you know now? Do you have any tips?
I just remember being very nervous about what other people were writing, and I wish I could tell myself to just focus on me and not try and compare any other person's personal statements. I think the best thing to remember is that you know what your interests are, and that may not be what your peers are interested in. So there's no point comparing personal statements and thinking, gosh, they wrote about this, or they're using these fancy words. Mine doesn't look like that, so I'm not a good candidate. Definitely not the case. I think just try and have authenticity. So be yourself. Don't feel like you have to have fancy language or whatever. Just be yourself. Think about what topics you're genuinely interested in. That doesn't necessarily have to be something on the syllabus in Oxford. It doesn't have to be what you're learning in sixth form. It could be things you're reading in your extra time, or maybe you've been inspired by a particular lecture, or even there's so many BBC Sounds and radio shows and so many other things that you can get involved with that could spark your interest. But something that was helpful for me was just making sure I kept my different drafts. I know people who completely erased stuff and then really soon regretted it. So just try and keep your drafts and show your teachers, ask for their feedback, but also at the same time, remember, it's your piece of writing. Don't feel like, if anybody gives you negative feedback, it's the end of the world. If someone tells you maybe, I think you should add this in, but if you feel like it isn't what you genuinely think, maybe don't. Just try and be authentic to what you want to represent. And remember, this has your name on it, so it should be what you really want to put out for yourself.
That's great advice. Before I chip in, Dave, I'm sure you have a view on this. Any tips? How do we make it stand out? Do's and don'ts?
Well, I just actually typed for PPE half an hour ago an answer to a question very like this. And I said what I do sometimes say when I get this sort of question: if you want it to stand out, make it weird. And then people say, well, but that would be weird. And I say, well, yes, it would be weird, but it will stand out, but not in a good way. You kind of don't want it to stand out. You kind of want it to just be. So Darcy has said what needs to be said. It's got to be personal. It's got to be yours. So there's a kind of clue in the name of personal statement about that. And it's kind of got to be a statement. So it's not a poem or a kind of, a eulogy to the subject or something. It's about you. It's got to be academic. So the UCAS website suggests at least 80% of it should be academic. So there is space in it for you to project yourself personally in other ways. Interests in sport and things are not irrelevant, not least because they give us a sense not of your balanced and rounded personality. We're much less worried about that. We're all nerds here anyway, so that's kind of fine. We don't have, my undergraduates at a former college thought I didn't have a personality. That may well be right. But we are importantly most concerned to use this as a tool in academic selection. So we need to find out what motivated you to apply for the degree that you're going for. One little bit of advice: if you're applying for philosophy and theology and you don't say anything about philosophy, that would look a bit odd. If you apply for philosophy and theology, and this does happen, and you don't say anything about theology, that would look a bit odd. It's very important, I think, to say that the personal statement matters much less to us than it does to everywhere else that you apply. Why so? Because we have other ways of getting that personal element of the application. We look at some of your schoolwork. We set you a test if you're applying for philosophy and theology. We interview you if all of that goes well. So there are lots of ways for us to get round the fact that the personal statement may very well have been lent on hard by teachers and parents and others. We actually get to meet you virtually this year, unfortunately, but often it's actually in person. So we are able to have that connection with you, with your enthusiasms, in ways that other universities don't. Write your personal statement first for the other universities and not for Oxford. Remember, there's only one personal statement. So if you're applying for different degrees at different universities, that will set you a challenge because you've got to look like a good applicant for all of them. So don't apply for physics and criminology at one university and philosophy and theology at Oxford. That will make your personal statement look very weird. Try to make your applications converge so that one personal statement will do for all of them. And remember that the personal statement for us is less significant than it is for somewhere else. So if somewhere else is especially interested in philosophy of religion, because that seems to be what all of the degrees are about, we're not going to worry about that because obviously our degree is about that too. And if you major a little bit more on that, that might suit that other university quite well. Mary.
Thanks, Dave. And I think that absorbs another question that we've had, which is, can I make an Oxford specific application? The answer to that is there is no need to. There is no information that we require you to supply for us that other universities wouldn't want, apart from if you're called to interview, and that is the Oxford specific bit of the application. 20 odd years ago, there used to be a separate form that people filled in with a personal statement extra, especially for Oxford, and I think Cambridge, at least until recently, has still done that. And so many teachers and advisors who remember that think there might be, extras, but there is no extra. As Dave says, you write your personal statement for all of your UCAS applications, one statement. And although it sounds like a massive balancing act, if you are thinking about the personal statement in the way that Darcy has described, in that it's about you, then actually, if you are choosing courses to apply to that you believe are going to suit you, on which you have the potential to thrive, and you're a good fit for all of the courses for which you're applying, then by writing about yourself, it's a personal statement, your interests, your aptitudes, your motivations for study, then that should be able to speak to all of those courses, regardless of their differences. So as we've heard, there's no need to tell us or to tell any of the other universities to which you're applying facts about our courses or about the august nature of our institutions or the beauty of our buildings or anything about that. We know about that. If I want to know what's in the course, I can read the handbook that I've helped to write. We want to know about what interests you. And for that reason, you might well write about what you've been reading or visiting or listening to. But what's interesting to your tutor is not a sort of potted summary of what you've been reading, listening to, visiting, thinking about, but your engagement with that. In other words, if you've been reading Alistair McGrath, Richard Dawkins, Dermot McCulloch, Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, if I want to know what those people think, I can read their book. In some cases, I will have read it. What's interesting to a tutor in your personal statement is how you have read that and how you found it and what you've got from it and what you're taking away from it. So don't give us a book review. Don't give us a list of books you've read. Don't give us a list of reasons why you like the course you're applying to. Give us some way to find out. Give all the universities to which you're applying some way to find out about you. And actually the whole personal statement experience becomes much more comfortable. And Darcy's word is the best word, much more authentic. And for that reason, if it's not already clear, do not be tempted, resist the temptation, if it is a temptation, to let anybody else write it for you or to crib it from the various online services which are available, some of which are very sadly exploitative. You cannot buy a better personal statement than you could write yourself, and you cannot get somebody else to write a better personal statement that you could write yourself. And remember, the other warning is, whatever you say in it, make sure it's true, or at the very least, make sure it's true by the time you might be called to interview. So if you're writing about the things you've read, make sure you've read them. And if you haven't quite read them by October 15th, make sure you've read them by the beginning of December, because a tutor will think they're doing you a favour by mentioning something they think you're interested in. If you're not, you've made life awkward for them and difficult for yourself. So make sure it's true. Personal statements are always on everybody's mind. The other prize question is interviews. Darcy, do you want to tell us about your interviews or interview? I bet you can remember.
Yeah, I had 4 in total, and it seems like that's quite a massive number, but it's absolutely fine. And I was actually glad to have quite a lot because I was getting in the swing of it. By the third, I was like, I want to do this again. So it's actually quite fun. It's lovely being immersed in the city and actually getting to go. And I think for your round of applications, you hopefully will be able to be in Oxford.
If you're applying, so if you've come early to the open day with a view to applying next year for entry in 2023, then you'll get to come. If you are submitting your UCAS form October 15th, 2021, so this year, you're going to be interviewed online.
Okay. Well, I didn't have virtual interviews, but I know a few people who did. I think, they're still assessing the same thing, so it's absolutely fine. I guess just, remembering the same things with your personal statement. Why, are you a good person to be here? What do you enjoy about your subject? You're not just regurgitating what you've read, as Mary said, but it's what you took out of it. With the interviews, they will ask you questions. Just take time to think. You don't have to answer in a hurry. And the main thing is just to talk through your thought process. So rather than leaving things out and then just saying, the third thing that comes to your head, say the first thing and your thought process and why you're thinking in the way you're thinking. The interview is essentially like a mock tutorial, and the tutorial is, you know, the weekly sessions you have with the tutor. Sorry for the noise again. The weekly sessions you have with the tutor in Oxford. So if you enjoy the interview and if, you know, you're having a good rapport, then hopefully, you know, you'd be a good student here, because that's what you do every week. We like to see the interview as a conversation, so it shouldn't really be one-way heavy. It's just, you know, you talking with the tutor about a subject and hopefully bouncing off each.
Good, thank you. Dave, interviews, we do them every year. I'm sure we do have opinions on when they go well and when they don't go well. What can you share?
One thing that's important to just reiterate from what Darcy said, because she said really everything that needs to be said, is that they are a conversation. So if you come in with a prepared speech, a kind of monologue that you want to deliver, and you won't let anybody else get a word in until you have delivered yourself of your speech, then that interview will not go well. It's quite possible for people to leave an interview where there were no awkward silences, no kind of wondering what the next thing to say is, because it's gone quite smoothly, and think, well, that went well, when it really hasn't, because the tutors haven't got anywhere near your thinking, because you've deflected them away from it by words. The best interviews can often be actually quite tough. They can be quite draining, because the tutor, the interviewer, as well as the person being interviewed, are actually having to work really very hard. And the time will go very quickly, so that at the end of maybe half an hour, you know, the interviewer, for whom it's probably the 10th one they've done that day, has felt the half hour quite a lot. But, you know, plenty of times I interview and somebody says, well, really, was that it? And they look at their watch and really half an hour has gone. But it didn't feel like that, because it was completely honed in on the various things that were being talked about. You might be asked about your personal statement. Mary said that. Keep a copy of your personal statement, read it before you have the interviews, because it might be asked about. So just having some sense of the things that could be drawn from there could be important or significant. But it doesn't have to be asked about. And the really vital thing is just the interviewers trying to find out how you think, how you are going to be able to use that space in a tutorial after your essay has been initially talked about, or maybe even read out if you're in a paired tutorial and your essay is that week's focus. So you read your essay out, and then there will be exactly this kind of cut and thrust, questions asked, clarification sought. Do you really think that? Had you thought about this? That's what the interview will be like. And if it goes well, then beyond any sense of getting to the right answers, the tutors themselves probably don't know what the right answers are. That's not why they're asking the questions. They will be able to assess your capacity to listen, to pause, to recognize when you need to change your mind. A good interview is conducted as much with your ears as with your mouth. And that, I think, is really the bottom line I'd want to emphasize. A good interview is as much about listening as it is about speaking. You will probably be interrupted. Tutors will interrupt you, not necessarily because they think things are going well, going badly, but because they're going well. They've learned what they needed to do. Okay, they've got that, so they now need to move on to something else. And, you know, we might ask you questions about things that, you know, bear no relation to philosophy and theology at all, apparently. But that doesn't matter. Just engage with what you're asked. It's not necessarily the case that you've landed in a biochemistry essay interview by mistake. I don't think I've ever heard that happen, so let's hope it never does. It's much more likely that they just want to get you onto ground you've never trod before, because that's the way we'll find out how you think.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that. And I would say sometimes it helps to remember exactly what an interview isn't. As we've heard, it is not some kind of celebrity lecture or you know, stage performance where you glide in say very clever things and everybody applauds and you leave again. You don't have to have a pre-prepared presentation. It's not as some students seem to think, and I don't know whether it's related to an interest in school debating and things like that, but it's not a context where you do well by digging in your heels, refusing to think, refusing to listen, and stubbornly defending your point to the hilt because that's what your team has to do and how you'll win the cup. If the conversation tends in a direction which leads you to change your mind, then that is fine. Defend your opinions if they are defensible. If you see their flaws, then that's absolutely fine. Let the tutor know that you see the flaws. It's not some kind of crude debating society, and it's not equally. It's not an interview on Newsnight. You don't have to, try and bamboozle the interviewer so that you only get to say the things that you say. You have to answer the question. You have to listen to the questions. And if you are quiet for a little bit, if you have to stop and think, if you have to say and if you have to say, oh no, actually I didn't mean that at all, I'm going to start again, that's all fine, because those things help us to get closer to what you're thinking. How do you prepare for it? Then I think one of the best ways, possibly the best way, is just to accustom yourself to conversation. And of course, I'm assuming that everybody, the vast majority of human beings, have conversations on a very regular basis. But they're not always conversations in this context. So try having conversations about academic interests rather than about Netflix. Try having conversations with, for many applicants, people who are older than you. So with experienced adults that you might not be as accustomed to speaking to on a near equal basis. So that means you can talk to family members, to friends of family, to teachers, and indeed to your peers, to friends. Have some kind of exchange system where you can talk to them about theology for 10 minutes if they can then talk to you about physics, and we have a very fair setup. And it doesn't matter if you want to study theology and religion and your parents are both chemists or didn't go to university or have no experience of this. You think, well, I've got no one to talk to. It is a very, very good test of your communication skills if you are able to make your ideas straightforward and comprehensible to people who don't have experience in them. So take those opportunities to have conversation, listen to what's being said to you. Are you being understood? Do you understand what's being asked of you? And that might make you a little bit more comfortable when it comes to having a fairly significant conversation with some experienced tutors whom you've not met before. And if you want to try doing that online on Teams, then that would be a direct mock-up of the context that you'll have this December at any rate. So interviews, Darcy seems to have survived hers and indeed wish she'd have 5 or 6 now. So they can't be all that bad. That's not to say that we take them lightly. I know that people are anxious. Tutors are anxious. It's a big undertaking, but they're not meant to make you miserable. They're meant to make you think. Sometimes thinking does make you a bit frustrated or a bit unhappy, but don't imagine that everybody else is sailing through and finding these conversations easy. They're meant to be challenging, but they're meant to be worthwhile. So personal statements, interviews, I suppose the one other major aspect of, just had a question ping in, interviews are conducted on which platform? It will be on Microsoft Teams in most cases. So Microsoft Teams, if that's a problem, then when you are called to interview, you can have that conversation with the college office. Technology should not be an obstacle to you having your interview, but the vast majority will be conducted on Microsoft Teams. So I'm glad I've picked that one up. I also see in the chat some religion and Oriental studies questions. Haven't forgotten you. So we will be coming to those in a moment, but something that again applies to everybody, written work. Some questions this morning about written work, some very simple rules. It doesn't have to be about theology, religion, or philosophy. It doesn't have to be something that you've written specially. Ideally, it would be no more than a maximum of about 2,000 words in length, and shorter is absolutely fine. Ideally, it would be something that you've done in the course of your A-level, IB, advanced higher, your formal school or college study so far. And it ought to display some of the criteria that we are hoping to see, some of the qualities that tutors are looking for, which are the ability to think clearly and to reason coherently, to show independence of thought, to structure written work and arguments in a logical way, and to write clearly and grammatically. So why does this matter? It matters because we get lots of opportunities to see how you perform under pressure. So an interview is performance under pressure. Exams and even, so qualifications, I should say, and even qualifications where exams have been suspended during the pandemic, that's still performance under some kind of pressure in some cases. Admissions tests, that's performance under pressure. We hope through the written work to see you working in a context where actually you are supported, where you're not on your own, where you're not dealing with, as Davis said, potentially unfamiliar ideas and unfamiliar topics at interview, but where you're dealing with stuff that you have been studying and what you do with that. And that's why we're very happy to receive essays from A-level English or something you've done for history for the IB, or portions of other work in any subject with your teacher's comments on them, because that gives us a sense of how you work in a different kind of environment and what that environment is like. That's not possible for everybody. If you're doing maths, physics and chemistry, you're probably not writing essays. If you are applying as a mature student, probably your most recent written work may not be very recent, and you might have to write something fresh. And if you do have to write something fresh, there are some suggestions on the website for how you go about that, and you're welcome to contact us and we'll give you some pointers. But for most people, you shouldn't be having to do anything new. You should look at your assemblage of stuff that you're proud of, that you've written, that your teachers have said, this is good work, and you choose your best and you send it to us. And you forget about it for a little bit, but you don't forget about it so much that you don't keep a copy and kind of remember what you sent, just in case it comes up later. Have I missed anything to do with written work? I've sailed through that quite quickly. Dave or Darcy, is there anything that you would like to add?
I don't think so. It's, you know, it is one element of the assessment. That's all it is. And it's something we ask for each of the degrees, whichever of the degrees it is. And again, you could spend weeks trying to select something because it matters so much. And in the end, it is just one thing, and it doesn't matter more than, for example, the personal statement, the test. Well, it probably matters more than the personal statement, less than the test. Well, who knows? It all factors in. What we're looking for is excellence across the board. We very rarely see, as in, you know, just acing everything. And we're always coming to a judgment about a variety of things. And this is one of the things we care about. We care about your being able to write essays. So don't overfreight the decision. And if you're not doing a philosophical or theological subject at A-level, don't worry about that. An essay in geography or in history is absolutely fine.
Absolutely. I see, as I've said, a couple of questions for religion and Oriental studies that draw on some of the things we have been talking about, actually. So I guess a visitor asks, suppose I'm applying to Islam and Arabic in religion and Oriental studies. I should say religion and Oriental studies is another joint degree that combines theology and religion, and everything that we do in theology and religion with Oriental studies, and that is mainly focused on the study of a language. Let me see if I can list them all. Hebrew, Arabic, Sanskrit, Pali, Greek and Syriac. I'm bound to have missed some, but a selection of languages that are tied to a religious tradition. So you would study Arabic with Islamic texts, Pali with Buddhist texts. Supposing I'm interested in applying to Islam and Arabic, should my personal statement be clearly focused on Islam and Arabic and what piques my interest in these specific realms? It would make sense, if that is where your interest lies, that when you are given an opportunity in a personal statement, say, what are your interests? What are your aptitudes? What are you interested in studying at the moment? What do you hope to go on to do? To write about Islam and Arabic. That's not to say that if you have other relevant and broader interests, so maybe you're interested in Islam and Arabic, but you would also be interested in picking up the philosophy of religion paper, which you can do on the theology and religion side of the course, or maybe you're also interested in studying some other religious traditions. No reason why you can't put that in as well, but it makes a lot of sense given that religion and Oriental studies degree is so focused on acquisition of a language, and acquisition of a language to a much higher level than in the theology and religion degree on its own, that you make clear what your motivation is, because it takes, there is, I think, some dedication, commitment and passion involved in learning a language to a high level. And if you've got that passion, determination and commitment, then that's a part of you personally that would be good to see in your personal statement. So religion and Oriental studies students, the personal statement advice applies, but do feel free to wax on the aspects of the course that interest you. Written work, we still require written work. Interviews are a conversation in the same way, whereas a theology and religion interview is likely to ask you about theological religious ideas. Similarly for philosophy, we'll ask you philosophical questions and try and get you to tease things out in that direction. Oriental studies is highly likely to be interested in your linguistic aptitude. That doesn't mean that they're going to expect you to arrive speaking Pali already. There are lots of ways that language tutors can test language aptitude. It's not always associated with languages you've studied before. So in a lot of cases, language learning, especially some of these languages, is pattern learning. So if you have been good at music or maths or other subjects in which you have to be able to identify patterns and work with patterns, those are often good indicators of an ability to do languages well, and they have lots of little exercises they can give you. So it's not necessarily a question of learning a language before, it's never a question of learning a language before you go. There is a question here about what's the ratio of applicants to places on the 3 courses. That data is in the online prospectus, so I'm not going to read out numbers here, but what I would say is if that question, and I'm not suggesting the question is motivated by this idea, but if the idea of thinking about ratios of applicants to places is a strategy for gaming the system or increasing your chances of getting in, that's not an effective way to think about it, because we don't choose by rolling a dice. If we rolled a dice or drew a raffle, if there are fewer applicants and more places, then you're more likely to get a place. But admissions are not a raffle or a dice roll. There's not equal chances. The field is not even. If you are a strong applicant, if you are motivated to study a course that you are interested in and you're a good applicant for that course, then you stand a better chance of a place on that course than you would in a course with a higher success rate, but where you have very limited interest. So you should always select a course on the basis of what interests and motivates you. And similarly, even if there are more places than applicants, if you can't put together a strong application for that particular course, you're not going to be admitted. So don't fixate on those figures. They're available, but they don't matter. I think we've got four or 5 minutes remaining. I think a nice way to finish off might be phrased slightly differently for Darcy and then for me and Dave on the other hand. Darcy, what do you wish, you've already said a little bit in relation to the personal statement, but if you could go back and give yourself some advice when you were applying or thinking about applying, what would you say to yourself? What do you wish you'd known then that you do know now? And I suppose the equivalent for us, Dave, would be, what message do you hope that students visiting this open day take away with regard to their application? A top tip. It's not necessarily singular, but let's see if we can pick one each and send people away with a collection of good advice.
I don't mind starting. This is a hard question, so just to put it out there, we did do a Instagram live, my college, which is SBC_Oxford. Small plug, shameless plug, but you can find it on Instagram still. We're doing live streams the whole day. I would say something that I wish I told myself is just to have a bit more confidence. It's quite a nerve-wracking process, and at times I was just, second guessing whether I was the right person for the university, or whether, I was a good fit, or whether I could do it. And here I am. But it just shows, you should have self-confidence, and you can do it if you think you can. Another thing is probably don't over-research. I have quite an obsessive personality, so I was, I was in YouTube holes, and I was on, like 10 pages deep into Google research and things, and it was just quite unnecessary. And I probably could have spent more time, actually reading and immersing myself in the subject and, enjoying it and loving it, rather than stressing myself out by, over researching, and it wasn't actually that useful in the end. Yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
That's very helpful, I think. Dave, I've given you a difficult task, but do you think have you a pithy takeaway message?
Well, we've already said a few things about not obsessing on particular aspects of the application, not kind of, going so deep that you forget what it's for. Have as clear a perspective as you can on why the university application system is the way it is. So the reason that there's only one application through UCAS for 5 universities and only one personal statement is because the course matters more, the subject matters more to you than where you do it. That's the way the thing's set up. That's why it's set up that way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is for us, because we ask all these extra things of you, why are we asking them? What are we doing here? Are we just trying to put, is it like kind of, well, if it was a super marathon rather than just a marathon, if we could get you to run 100 miles instead of just 20, well, that would sort it out. We've got far too many applicants, but, we just put lots of barriers in the way. It's not that at all. Each one of them, written work, test, if you do the test for philosophy and theology, whatever, interviews, all of these things are intended to build up a total picture of you for us. We, in spite of what Mary just said about not having enough applicants for places, we expect pretty much most years we will have enough applicants for the places. That won't be the problem. The problem will be either working out which applicants are well motivated, are going to survive and thrive in the way that we teach in Oxford, which isn't the way that other institutions necessarily teach. You'll be far more exposed intellectually here, and you will grow under that if it's the right kind of place for you. So are you somebody who will survive and thrive on the degree here? That's a question that we want you to help us with. Only your honesty and giving yourself to us in each of these tasks, not obsessing about them, but just doing your best and getting them in by the deadlines, that's fine. Then we will be able to do it. And then the last thing is to say, it is just true that in most years there will be more good applicants for many of our degrees than there are places. Not for all of them, but for many of our degrees that will be true. 150 applicants, maybe, you know, we're looking to make about 30, 35 offers on a degree. If that were true, the chances are that maybe 70 of those applicants would do fine here, but we're looking to admit the best 35. So you're going to need to trust us. And that doesn't mean trying to trick us, because that generally will go badly. It means being as honest with us as you can and letting us work out whether among this very already selective and excellent group of applicants, you are one of the best. If you're being interviewed, that is already actually quite a significant achievement. It's not a sign of failure not to get a place at that point. The very fact that you're in a position even to apply in the first place and to go through all these things is a sign of your quality. And we don't have enough places in any of our degrees to give to all of the people who might be excellent applicants for it. So you're going to need to trust us. And we are putting these things on to help you to see why it is that we're doing what we do. And if you can trust us and just give yourselves over to this process, then hopefully, as Darcy did with the interviews, you'll enjoy it. And for many of you who are watching, you'll get places, but for some of you, you won't. But we know that you will be in a place to get a position, to get an offer from a very good university, even if it's not Oxford.
Thank you, Dave. I have nothing to add there, except to say that to those who are submitting their UCAS forms in under a month's time, very good luck to you. Ask for the advice that you need. Leave yourself plenty of time and do the best that you can. And well done for even getting as far as you have today, which is at the end of an hour-long live stream. This is going to remain on the website for a little while. So if you came in late or if you had to dash off, it's still there for you to watch. So I wish you all very, very well. And thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.